The bitter wind howled across the snow-laden plains of Colorado Territory, tearing through Emma Pierce's woolen shawl as if it were nothing but gossamer. February 1876 had brought the harshest winter anyone in Colorado City could remember. And as the young widow trudged through knee-deep snow toward her small schoolhouse, she felt the weight of the past 2 years pressing down upon her shoulders more heavily than any blizzard. The schoolhouse appeared on the horizon, a lonely sentinel against the vast whiteness. Emma had been the town's only teacher since arriving with her husband, Thomas, 3 years prior. Their dreams had been as vast as the western landscape, until influenza had stolen him just 6 months after they'd settled. At 26, Emma had buried both her husband and the future they'd planned, choosing to pour herself into educating the town's children rather than returning east to her disapproving parents who had warned against the match and the move west. As she approached the schoolhouse door, something felt wrong. The lock had been forced, the door hanging slightly ajar. Emma pushed it open cautiously, gasping at the destruction inside. Books torn to pieces, desks overturned, the small stove knocked over, its precious coals scattered uselessly across the floor. "No," she whispered, sinking to her knees among the wreckage. Notes from her lesson plans swirled around her: history, arithmetic, literature, all ripped to shreds. The vandals had even broken the small portrait of Thomas she kept on her desk, the frame splintered, the glass webbed with cracks. Emma gathered the portrait with trembling hands. It was the last image she had of him, painted just before they'd left Philadelphia. A sob tore from her throat as her fingers traced the damaged canvas. The hours passed unnoticed as she tried to salvage what she could, piling books and papers, writing desks, until her fingers grew numb from the cold. With the stove damaged, the temperature inside the schoolhouse was barely warmer than outside. Still, she couldn't bear to leave the chaos. Her students would arrive tomorrow morning, expecting warmth and learning, not this senseless destruction. Exhaustion eventually overcame her. Emma sank to her knees in the middle of the schoolroom, clutching Thomas's portrait to her chest. How could she possibly restore order by morning? Where would she find the strength to begin again? She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats over the wind's howl, didn't notice the tall figure that paused in the doorway, observing her kneeling form with quiet concern. "Madam, are you hurt?" The deep voice startled Emma from her grief. She looked up through tear-blurred eyes at the silhouette of a man broad-shouldered and tall. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if one of the vandals had returned. "The school," she managed, her voice cracking. "Someone's destroyed everything." The stranger stepped fully into the room, and Emma could see him clearly now, a man in his early 30s perhaps, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the western sun. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair with threads of silver at the temples. "Name's Case Vaughn, madam. I've got a place about 3 miles east." He surveyed the destruction with a grim expression. "This happened today. I don't know. I just arrived to prepare for tomorrow's lessons." Emma tried to stand, but her legs had gone stiff from kneeling so long in the cold. She stumbled, catching herself on a desk. Case moved quickly, steadying her with a gentle but firm grip on her elbow. "You're half frozen. How long have you been here?" Emma glanced out the window, surprised to see that darkness had fallen. "I am not sure. Hours, perhaps. And with no fire." It wasn't a question. His eyes, a deep shade of brown that reminded her of rich soil after spring rain, studied her face with concern. "You can't stay here tonight." "I need to clean this up," Emma protested weakly, gesturing at the chaos around them. "The children will be here in the morning." "No schoolhouse in this condition, madam. Not with this weather turning worse." As if to emphasize his point, the wind screamed louder, rattling the windows. There's another storm coming. Felt it in my bones before I rode out to check my fence line. But I can't just... Emma tried to take a step and found her legs would no longer support her. She swayed dangerously. Case caught her before she could fall, his strong hands steady and warm even through her layers of clothing. That settles it. You're coming with me. We'll send word to town tomorrow about the school. I don't even know you, Emma protested, though she lacked the strength to pull away. Mrs. He paused, waiting for her to supply her name. Pierce. Emma Pierce. I'm the teacher. Mrs. Pierce, I promise you'll be safe at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Simmons, will be there. You need warmth and rest, and neither is happening here tonight. Emma wanted to argue, to insist she could manage, but the truth was undeniable. The schoolhouse was uninhabitable, and her small room at the boarding house was nearly a mile's walk through deepening snow. Her body betrayed her with a violent shiver. Very well, she conceded, reaching for her satchel and Thomas's damaged portrait. Case helped her gather her belongings, then guided her toward the door. The wind slammed into them as they stepped outside, nearly knocking Emma off her feet. The snow was falling so thickly now that she could barely make out the shape of his horse tethered nearby. "Can you walk to my horse?" Case asked, his voice raised against the wind. Emma nodded, but after just a few steps her legs buckled beneath her. She fell to her knees in the snow, a cry of frustration escaping her lips. The cold immediately seeped through her skirts, but she couldn't find the strength to rise. Without hesitation, Case scooped her into his arms. Emma was too exhausted to protest the impropriety, instead allowing herself to be carried to his horse, a large buckskin that stood patiently in the swirling snow. "I'll need to hold you in front of me," Case explained as he set her briefly on her feet, keeping one arm firmly around her waist. "Can you manage to get up if I help you?" Emma nodded, summoning her last reserves of strength as he boosted her onto the saddle. Moments later he swung up behind her, his chest solid against her back as he reached around her for the reins. "Lean back against me if you need to," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "It's a short ride, but this storm's getting worse by the minute." As the horse picked its way carefully through the deepening snow, Emma found herself doing exactly that, leaning into the solid warmth of Case Vaughn. The impropriety of their position should have concerned her, but all she could feel was gratitude for his timely appearance and the promise of shelter from the storm. The blizzard intensified, the world beyond narrowing to white fury. Emma couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, but Case rode with confidence, one arm wrapped protectively around her waist to keep her secure in the saddle. "Not much farther," he assured her after what seemed like hours but was likely only 30 minutes. "My ranch is just beyond that rise." Through the curtain of snow, Emma began to make out the dark shape of buildings. As they drew closer, she could see a substantial log house with light glowing from its windows, several outbuildings, and a large barn. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. Case guided the horse directly to the front porch, halting beneath its sheltering roof. "I'll help you down first, then take care of Thunder here." He slid from the saddle, then reached up for Emma, his hand spanning her waist as he lifted her down as easily as if she weighed nothing. Her legs buckled immediately, and once again he caught her, sweeping her into his arms without comment. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman with a concerned expression. "Case Vaughn." "What in heaven's name?" The woman's scolding broke off as she took in Emma's pale face. "Bring her in this instant. The poor thing looks half frozen to death." "Mrs. Simmons, this is Mrs. Pierce, the schoolteacher," Case explained as he carried Emma into the warmth of the house. "Found her at the schoolhouse. Someone vandalized it. She'd been there for hours with no heat." "Mercy, Mrs. Simmons exclaimed, bustling ahead of them. "Bring her straight to the guest room. I'll fetch hot water and blankets." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly refined for a bachelor's dwelling. Well-crafted furniture, polished floors covered with quality rugs, and shelves lined with books. Emma noticed these details hazily as Case carried her down a hallway and into a comfortable bedroom dominated by a large four-poster bed. "Mrs. Simmons will help you get warmed up," he said, setting her gently on the edge of the bed. "I need to see to my horse, but I'll check on you later." Emma managed a weak "thank you" before he nodded and stepped out, leaving her with the housekeeper who had already begun pouring steaming water into a basin. "Let's get you out of these wet things," Mrs. Simmons said practically, helping Emma remove her sodden cloak and outer garments. "You're chilled to the bone, poor dear." Within 20 minutes, Emma found herself in a borrowed nightgown, wrapped in warm blankets, with a hot brick at her feet and a cup of hot tea in her hands. The shivering had finally stopped, replaced by the painful tingling of circulation returning to her extremities. "The school," she murmured, fighting against the exhaustion pulling at her. "I need to let people know." "Not tonight, you don't," Mrs. Simmons said firmly. "This storm's the worst we've seen all winter. No one's going anywhere until it passes. Now drink your tea. I've added a bit of honey and whiskey to help you sleep." Emma wanted to protest, but found she lacked the energy. She sipped the tea obediently, its warmth spreading through her chest. By the time she'd finished half the cup, her eyelids were drooping. She was vaguely aware of Mrs. Simmons taking the cup from her hands and helping her lie down properly. As sleep claimed her, Emma's last coherent thought was of the way Case Vaughn had carried her through the snow, his arms strong and secure around her, making her feel safe for the first time in years. Morning brought pale sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. For a moment, Emma lay disoriented, trying to place herself. The events of the previous day came rushing back: the destroyed schoolhouse, the snowstorm, and the cowboy who had rescued her. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Mrs. Pierce, are you awake?" Mrs. Simmons's voice called. "Yes, please come in," Emma answered, pushing herself to a sitting position. The housekeeper entered, carrying a tray. "Brought you some breakfast. How are you feeling this morning?" "Much improved, thank you." It was true, though her body ached slightly, the bone-deep chill was gone. "Though I'm concerned about my students. They'll be expecting school today." Mrs. Simmons set the tray across Emma's lap. "No need to worry about that. Case rode into town at first light to inform Mayor Holloway about what happened at the schoolhouse. The mayor's sending word to all the families that school's canceled for the week." "For the week?" Emma exclaimed. "But surely we can clear the debris." And Case said that stove was damaged beyond quick repair, and with this weather, you'd all freeze solid before lunchtime. Mrs. Simmons's tone brooked no argument. The mayor agreed, said they'd need to order a new stove from Denver anyway. Emma sighed, recognizing the truth in this assessment. "I suppose you're right. Still, I hate to think of the children missing their education." "A week won't hurt them," Mrs. Simmons assured her. "Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. Your clothes are dry, though they needed a good brushing to get rid of all that coal dust. They're hanging in the wardrobe there." After Mrs. Simmons left, Emma ate her breakfast: eggs, bacon, and biscuits still warm from the oven while contemplating her situation. She was effectively stranded at a stranger's ranch, at least until the roads cleared enough for safe travel. The propriety of the situation was questionable at best, even with Mrs. Simmons's presence as chaperone. Yet something about Case Vaughn inspired trust. There had been nothing improper in his manner, only genuine concern and assistance when she'd most needed it. Emma dressed in her now clean clothes and ventured out of the bedroom. The hallway led to a spacious main room that combined sitting and dining areas, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Mrs. Simmons was nowhere to be seen, but Case sat at a desk in the corner, writing in what appeared to be a ledger. He looked up at her entrance, setting aside his pen and standing. "Mrs. Pierce, you're looking much better this morning." "Thanks to your hospitality," Emma replied. "Mrs. Simmons told me you rode into town. I can't thank you enough for sending word about the school. Least I could do." He gestured toward an armchair near the fire. "Please make yourself comfortable. Would you like coffee?" Emma accepted both the seat and the offer of coffee. As Case poured from the pot kept warm on the hearth, she took the opportunity to study him in daylight. He was tall and broad-shouldered, but there was a quiet grace to his movements that belied his size. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor work, with laugh lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled often, though his expression now was serious. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore simple but quality clothing, a clean flannel shirt and well-worn denims. "Mrs. Simmons mentioned the schoolhouse will be closed for a week," Emma said as he handed her the coffee. Case nodded, taking the chair opposite hers. "The damage was worse than I initially thought. Mayor Holloway's ordering a new stove from Denver, and some men will go out today to start repairs if the weather holds." He hesitated before continuing. "Did you have any idea who might have done this? Any trouble with anyone in town?" Emma shook her head. "None whatsoever. The children are well behaved for the most part, and the parents have always been supportive." She frowned, remembering. "Though lately there's been talk about expanding the school. Some of the newer families want to hire a second teacher for the older students." "Could be someone doesn't like that idea," Case mused. "More teachers means higher taxes." "Perhaps," Emma conceded, "but to destroy educational materials, it seems so senseless." They were interrupted by Mrs. Simmons bustling in from what Emma presumed was the kitchen, carrying a basket of mending. "Don't mind me," she said, settling into a rocking chair near the fire. "Just catching up on some sewing while the bread rises." Her presence changed the tenor of the conversation, moving it to safer, more general topics. Emma learned that Case had established his ranch 8 years earlier, coming west from Virginia after the Civil War. Unlike many who sought their fortunes in Colorado's gold and silver mines, he'd focused on raising cattle and horses, gradually building one of the more successful operations in the area. "Been thinking of expanding into sheep as well," he mentioned, "though that's not a popular notion with some of the other ranchers." "The Wilsons would have a conniption," Mrs. Simmons remarked, not looking up from her mending. "Old Jacob Wilson's been telling anyone who'll listen that sheep ruin grazing land for cattle." "Old Jacob Wilson says a lot of things," Case replied with a slight smile. "Most of them based on superstition rather than fact." The conversation flowed easily through the morning. Emma found herself surprisingly comfortable in their company, especially given the unusual circumstances of her presence there. By the time lunch was served, she felt she'd known them both for much longer than a mere day. After the meal, Case excused himself to tend to ranch business. "Storm's cleared enough that I need to check on the herd," he explained. "Some of the younger cattle might have gotten separated during the blizzard. Will you be safe?" The question slipped out before Emma could consider how it might sound overly familiar, perhaps even presumptuous. But Case merely smiled, his eyes warming. "I've weathered worse, Mrs. Pierce, but I appreciate your concern." After he'd gone, Emma offered to help Mrs. Simmons with household tasks. The older woman initially protested that guests shouldn't work, but Emma insisted. "I've been taking care of myself since Thomas passed," she explained as they washed the lunch dishes together. Idle hands make me restless. At the mention of her late husband, Mrs. Simmons's expression softened. I wondered, with you being so young, how long has he been gone? Almost 2 years now, Emma replied, focusing on drying a plate. We'd only been in Colorado City 6 months when influenza took him. And you stayed on teaching? Emma nodded. We'd come west for a fresh start. Going back east felt like admitting defeat. Besides, she added with a small smile, the children needed a teacher and teaching gives me purpose. Mrs. Simmons studied her with knowing eyes. Purpose is important after such a loss. I lost my Henry 15 years ago. Coming to work for Case gave me purpose when I needed it most. How did you come to work for Mr. Vaughn? Emma asked, grateful for the shift in conversation. My Henry and I had a small place northeast of here. After he passed, I couldn't manage it alone. Case bought the land, paid fair price too, and offered me a position keeping house. Been here 7 years now. She smiled fondly. He's a good man. Too good to be living alone the way he does. Emma recognized the speculative gleam in the older woman's eye. She'd seen it often enough from well-meaning matrons in town who considered a young widow fair game for matchmaking. Mr. Vaughn seems quite content with his ranch, she observed neutrally. Mrs. Simmons snorted softly. Content enough with the ranch, perhaps, but a man needs more than land and cattle, especially one with as much heart as he has. Why, you should see him with the Jenkins children. Brought them a puppy last Christmas when their father was laid up with that broken leg. Despite herself, Emma found she wanted to hear more about her rescuer. He seems very community-minded. That he is. First to help when someone's in need, last to take credit for it. Mrs. Simmons handed Emma another plate to dry. Lost his wife and baby during the war. She died in childbirth while he was away fighting. Came west afterward to start fresh, much like you did. Emma absorbed this information with a pang of recognition. So Case Vaughn understood grief as intimately as she did. Perhaps that explained the quiet compassion she'd sensed in him. The afternoon passed pleasantly in domestic tasks. By the time Case returned, stamping snow from his boots at the door, Emma had helped prepare dinner and learned much more about both her host and the surrounding community from the garrulous Mrs. Simmons. Found all the cattle, Case announced as he hung his coat by the door. Though 2 calves needed rescuing from a snowdrift, they're in the barn now warming up. Will they be all right? Emma asked. Case glanced at her, seemingly pleased by her interest. They should be. Strong little things, just got separated from their mothers in the whiteout. Dinner was a hearty beef stew with fresh bread, eaten at the large oak table in the main room. The conversation flowed naturally between ranching matters, town news, and occasional reminiscences about places they'd all lived. Emma found herself laughing more than she had in months at Mrs. Simmons's stories about her first disastrous attempts at making gooseberry jam when she was newly married exploded all over the kitchen. It did, the housekeeper recounted. Henry came running and thinking a gun had gone off. After dinner, they gathered near the fireplace. Mrs. Simmons brought out her knitting while Case read aloud from a volume of Tennyson's poetry that Emma had noticed on his bookshelf. His deep voice gave the verses a resonant quality that brought them vividly to life. You read beautifully, Emma commented when he paused between poems. Most of my students struggle so with expression when reading aloud. My mother was insistent on proper elocution, Case explained with a small smile. Made me and my brothers practice reading Shakespeare aloud every evening, said it would make us gentlemen, though I'm not sure it took with my younger brother. Last I heard, he was raising hell somewhere in California. Are you close with your family? Emma asked, curious about this glimpse into his past. A shadow crossed his face. Parents are both gone now. Lost track of my brothers during the war, one on each side. Haven't had word from either in years." "I'm sorry," Emma said softly, understanding all too well the pain of fractured family ties. Her own parents had practically disowned her when she'd chosen to marry Thomas and move west. The evening concluded relatively early, with Mrs. Simmons declaring that the day's exertions had tired her old bones. As she bid them good night, she gave Emma a significant look that suggested she approved of the conversation that had flowed between her employer and their guest. Left alone with Case, Emma suddenly felt a flutter of nervousness. Propriety suggested she should retire as well, but she was reluctant to end their conversation. Case seemed to sense her uncertainty. "I should check on those calves once more before turning in," he said, standing. "Would you care to see them? They're quite something, barely a week old." The invitation surprised Emma, but she found herself accepting readily. "I'd like that, though I don't have proper boots for the snow. We can remedy that." Case retrieved a pair of smaller boots from a closet near the door. "These were my sister-in-law's. She left them here years ago during a visit. Might be close enough in size." The boots were a bit large but serviceable, with an extra pair of woolen socks that Mrs. Simmons provided from her mending basket. Bundled in her cloak, and a scarf Case insisted she wrap around her neck, Emma followed him out into the crisp night air. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline stillness. Overhead, stars blazed in a black velvet sky with a clarity Emma had only ever experienced in the west. Their breath formed clouds in the frigid air as they made their way carefully across the packed snow to the barn. "Watch your step here," Case cautioned, offering his arm as they navigated an icy patch. Emma accepted the support, acutely aware of his solid presence beside her. The barn was warm and fragrant with the scent of hay and animals. Lanterns hung from posts cast a golden glow over the stalls. Case led her to a pen in the corner where two tiny calves lay nestled in fresh straw. "The black one is a bull calf," he explained, his voice softening as he crouched beside the pen. "The red heifer there belongs to one of my best milk cows. Got separated in the whiteout." Emma knelt beside him, charmed by the drowsy calves. The red one blinked at her with enormous liquid eyes, then stretched its neck to sniff at her hand when she extended it. "She's beautiful," Emma murmured as the calf's velvety muzzle nudged her palm. "She likes you," Case observed, watching them with a warm expression. "Good judge of character, cattle are," Emma laughed softly. "Is that so, and what character traits do they particularly admire?" "Gentleness, patience." His eyes met hers, serious now despite his smile. "Courage." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Emma felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not especially courageous, Mr. Vaughn." "Case," he corrected. "And I disagree, Mrs. Pierce. Staying in a new town after losing your husband, continuing to teach when you could have returned east, that takes considerable courage." "Emma," she offered in return. Then, feeling the need to deflect his praise, "It wasn't courage so much as stubbornness. My parents were quite against our move west. Returning would have meant admitting they were right." Case's laugh was unexpected, a rich, deep sound that resonated in the quiet barn. "Stubbornness, courage, sometimes they're just different words for the same quality. Either way, I admire it." They remained in the barn longer than strictly necessary to check on the calves, talking quietly about their lives, their losses, and the unexpected paths that had led them both to Colorado territory. Emma found herself sharing thoughts and feelings she'd kept buried since Thomas's death, her loneliness, her determination to make their shared dream work despite his absence, her occasional doubts about whether she could succeed alone. Case listened attentively, offering occasional insights from his own experience, but never presuming to tell her how she should feel. When she mentioned her in-law's suggestion that she return east to teach in civilization, his response was immediate and firm. "The children here need you more," he said. "Eastern schools have plenty of teachers. Out here, you're making a real difference." "That's exactly what Thomas used to say," Emma replied softly. "He believed the frontier needed education as much as it needed railroads and cattle." "Sounds like a man of vision," Case observed. "He was," Emma agreed, a familiar pang of loss squeezing her heart. But for the first time, she found the pain was accompanied by warm remembrance rather than overwhelming grief. Somehow, sharing memories of Thomas with someone who seemed to genuinely understand made the burden lighter. Eventually, the chill of the night reminded them of the late hour. As they walked back to the house, snow crunching beneath their boots, Emma was keenly aware of Case's steadying hand at her elbow. "Thank you," she said as they reached the porch. "Not just for the rescue yesterday, but for today for listening." "Thank you for trusting me with your thoughts," he replied, his face half shadowed in the moonlight. "It's been a long time since I've had such a meaningful conversation." They parted at her bedroom door with a simple goodnight, yet Emma felt a curious reluctance to end their time together. As she prepared for bed, she found herself replaying their conversations, analyzing the warmth in his eyes when he'd spoken of courage, the gentle understanding in his voice when she'd mentioned Thomas. For the first time in nearly 2 years, Emma fell asleep thinking of someone other than her late husband. The next 3 days fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Each morning after breakfast, Case would ride out to tend to ranch business while Emma helped Mrs. Simmons with household tasks. In the afternoons, Emma would often accompany Case on his rounds of the nearby outbuildings and corrals, learning about ranch operations with genuine interest. She discovered that Case was not only a skilled rancher, but also an avid reader with a collection of books that rivaled her own. Their evenings were spent discussing literature, history, and occasionally politics, though they carefully avoided the still raw topic of the war that had divided his family. On the 4th day of her stay, a wagon arrived from town, bringing supplies and news. The driver, a weather-beaten man Case introduced as Pete Rollins, delivered a message from Mayor Holloway. The new stove for the schoolhouse had been ordered but would take at least another week to arrive from Denver. In the meantime, repairs to the damaged furniture and walls were underway. "Mayor says to tell you they found some boot prints outside the back window," Pete reported as they unloaded supplies in the kitchen. "Men's boots, but nothing distinctive enough to identify who might have done it." "Did anyone see anything suspicious that night?" Case asked, stacking sacks of flour on the pantry shelf. Pete shook his head. "Nobody's admitting to it if they did. Sheriff Briggs is asking around, but you know how folks are tight-lipped unless it affects them directly." After Pete departed, Emma found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. With the schoolhouse repairs delayed, she would need to remain at the ranch longer than anticipated or find alternative accommodation in town. "You're welcome to stay as long as necessary," Case assured her when she broached the subject. "Mrs. Simmons enjoys your company and I." He hesitated, then continued more carefully. "Having you here has been no burden whatsoever." "You've both been incredibly kind," Emma replied, "but I worry about imposing further. Perhaps the boarding house in town might have a room available now." Mrs. Simmons, who had been pretending not to listen while kneading bread dough, abandoned all pretense of disinterest. "Nonsense. That boarding house is drafty as can be, and Mrs. Langley's cooking would make a coyote think twice. You'll stay right here where it's warm and the company's decent." Emma couldn't help smiling at the housekeeper's vehemence. "When you put it that way, Mrs. Simmons, how could I possibly refuse?" The matter settled, life at the ranch continued its pleasant routine. Emma found herself increasingly drawn to Case's quiet strength, his thoughtfulness, and the gentle way he interacted with everyone from Mrs. Simmons to the ranch hands to the animals in his care. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the easy grace with which he moved, the rare but transformative smile that lit his entire face when something genuinely amused him. Such feelings brought with them a complicated mix of emotions. Part of her felt disloyal to Thomas's memory, while another part recognized that her heart was healing, opening to possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. On her 6th day at the ranch, Case proposed a ride to check fence lines on the eastern property. "If you're interested," he added. "It's a fair distance, but the weather's mild today, and the views from the ridge are worth seeing." Emma accepted readily. Though she was a competent if cautious rider, she hadn't been on horseback since arriving in Colorado City. Case provided a gentle mare named Daisy and helped her mount, his hands firm but respectful at her waist. They rode side by side across snow-covered pastureland, Case pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the ranch's early days. As they climbed toward a ridge that marked the eastern boundary of his property, the landscape opened dramatically before them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, their peaks gleaming white against the brilliant blue sky. "It's breathtaking," Emma said as they paused at the crest of the ridge. "I've never seen anything so vast." "That's what struck me when I first came here," Case replied, his gaze sweeping over the panorama. After the war, everything back east felt confined, constrained by memories and expectations. Out here, he gestured at the expansive view. Out here I could breathe again. Emma understood completely. Thomas felt the same way. Said Philadelphia was choking him with its narrow streets and narrower minds. She smiled at the memory. He was determined we'd find freedom in the West. "Did you find freedom?" Case asked, watching her with those perceptive eyes. Emma considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "Not the way we'd planned it together, but I have built something meaningful here. The school, the children, they've become my purpose." Case nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. Purpose is essential. Without it, we're just drifting. They continued their ride along the ridge, checking fence posts for damage from the recent storms. Emma found herself enjoying the physical work helping to clear snow from fence lines, learning to test posts for stability as much as the conversation that flowed between them. By the time they turned back toward the ranch, the afternoon was waning, casting long shadows across the snow. The temperature was dropping rapidly as the sun sank toward the horizon. "We should pick up the pace," Case suggested, eyeing the darkening sky. Nights still turn bitter cold this time of year. They urged their horses to a faster trot, but they'd traveled less than a mile when Daisy suddenly stumbled, pitching forward with a startled whinny. Emma clung to the saddle as the mare regained her footing, but immediately noticed the horse favoring her right foreleg. Case dismounted quickly and was at Daisy's side before Emma could even gather her scattered thoughts. "Easy, girl," he murmured, running expert hands down the mare's leg. "Let me see what's troubling you. Is she injured?" Emma asked anxiously, sliding carefully from the saddle. "Stepped in a prairie dog hole, I expect," Case replied, gently probing the horse's fetlock joint. "Nothing broken, but she's strained something. She can't carry you back without risking worse injury." Emma looked around at the vast landscape, the ranch buildings no longer visible from their position. "How far are we from home?" "About 4 miles, Case estimated, straightening. "We have 2 options. Either I ride ahead and come back with another horse, or we double up on Thunder here and lead Daisy back slowly." The first option would mean leaving Emma alone on the ridge as darkness approached. Though she wasn't particularly fearful by nature, the thought of waiting alone in the growing cold was less than appealing. "Could your horse carry us both?" she asked, glancing at the sturdy buckskin gelding. "Thunder." "Certainly. He's carried heavier loads over worse terrain." Case moved to adjust his saddle. "We'll need to ride closely together, though. I hope that won't make you uncomfortable." Emma considered the propriety of such an arrangement versus the practicality of their situation. "Under the circumstances, I think we can manage without scandalizing Mrs. Simmons," she replied with a small smile. Case helped her mount first, then swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he reached around her for the reins. It was reminiscent of their first meeting, except this time, Emma was fully conscious of their proximity, the solid strength of his arms encircling her, the clean masculine scent of him, the way his breath stirred wisps of hair near her ear. "Comfortable?" he asked as they set off at a walk, leading the limping Daisy behind them. "Yes," Emma answered, though comfortable hardly described the flutter of awareness that ran through her at his nearness. She was grateful he couldn't see her face. The journey back took twice as long as their outward ride. As twilight deepened into dusk, the temperature dropped sharply. Emma found herself leaning back against Case's warmth, grateful for the shared body heat. "Cold?" he asked, noticing her slight shiver. "A little," she admitted. Without comment, he shifted the reins to one hand and wrapped his free arm more securely around her waist, drawing her closer against him. The intimacy of the gesture should have alarmed her, yet it felt oddly right, as natural as the rhythm of their shared breaths forming clouds in the frigid air. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the creak of leather and the muffled thud of hooves in snow. Stars began to appear overhead, brilliantly clear in the darkening sky. "I never tire of this view," Case said softly, his voice close to her ear. "City folk pay good money for glimpses of heaven's chandelier, but out here, we get the full display every clear night." Emma tilted her head back to take in the star-filled expanse above them. "It makes one feel simultaneously insignificant and part of something immense," she observed. "As if we're both nothing and everything at once." She felt rather than saw his smile. "You have a poet's soul, Emma Pierce." The way he said her name sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with physical proximity. For a dizzying moment, she wondered what it would be like to turn in his arms and discover if his lips would be as warm as his voice. The thought startled her with its clarity and intensity. Emma straightened slightly, creating a small space between them as if physical distance could provide clarity for her confused emotions. If Case noticed her withdrawal, he made no comment. They continued toward the ranch, the lights of which were now visible in the distance, like earthbound stars guiding them home. By the time they reached the barn, Emma's thoughts were in turmoil. The ride had awakened feelings she had believed dormant or perhaps had never truly experienced before. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Ranch hands took charge of the horses, Case giving specific instructions about Daisy's care before turning to help Emma down. His hands lingered briefly at her waist after her feet touched the ground, his eyes searching hers in the lantern light. "Thank you for today," he said quietly. "I enjoyed our ride despite the complication at the end." "As did I," Emma replied, suddenly shy under his steady gaze. "Thank you for showing me your land. It's truly beautiful." Something in her tone or expression made his eyes warm. "I've grown to love it here," he said, "more so recently." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Emma felt her cheeks flush and was grateful for the dim lighting that concealed it. They walked together to the house, where Mrs. Simmons fussed over them both, declaring they must be half frozen and insisting on hot baths and warm food before either did anything else. Later, soaking in the copper bathtub Mrs. Simmons had filled with steaming water and placed behind a screen in her bedroom, Emma tried to make sense of her turbulent emotions. Was she truly developing feelings for Case? Or was she simply responding to kindness and attention after long months of loneliness? Was she betraying Thomas by allowing her heart to stir for another man? She had no ready answers. All she knew was that something had shifted during their ride together, something fundamental and potentially life-changing. The following morning brought new developments. Pete Rawlins arrived again, this time with a message that caused Case's expression to darken as he read it. "What is it?" Emma asked, concerned by his sudden tension. "Sheriff Briggs thinks he knows who vandalized your schoolhouse," Case replied, handing her the note. "The Harker boys were bragging at the saloon last night, got drunk and loose-lipped." Emma read the terse message with growing anger. According to Sheriff Briggs, Silas and Jeremiah Harker had been overhead claiming responsibility for teaching that stuck-up schoolmarm a lesson. The sheriff had detained them but wanted Emma to come to town to press formal charges. "I'll go immediately," Emma declared, already mentally preparing for the confrontation. "I'll take you," Case said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This might get unpleasant." The Harkers have friends in town. They set out within the hour, taking Case's wagon instead of riding horseback due to the distance and the likelihood of returning the same day. The road to Colorado City was passable but rough, the recent snow packed down by other travelers. Emma sat beside Case on the wagon seat, bundled against the cold but warmed by indignation. "I don't understand why they would target the school," she said, breaking a lengthy silence. "I've never had any dealings with the Harker family. They don't even have children attending school." "Silas Harker's been trouble since he was a boy," Case replied, his jaw tight. "He and his brother moved here from Kansas about 3 years ago, right around when you arrived, I'd guess. They've worked odd jobs, mostly at the sawmill, but they're known more for drinking and fighting than honest labor. But why destroy educational materials? What purpose could that possibly serve?" Case's expression was grim. "Some men don't need much reason to destroy things. Makes them feel powerful to tear down what others have built." He glanced at her. "Could also be they were paid to do it." "Paid? By whom?" "That's what I'd like to know," Case said grimly. "The timing is interesting right when the town's debating expanding the school." The implications of this settled heavily between them as they continued toward town. If someone had orchestrated the vandalism to derail plans for school expansion, it suggested a level of calculation far more concerning than simple drunken mischief. Colorado City came into view around midday, a growing but still modest settlement nestled in a valley with Pikes Peak, rising majestically in the distance. The main street consisted of a dozen or so businesses: general store, hotel, saloon, blacksmith, and various other establishments necessary for a frontier town. The jail where Sheriff Briggs maintained his office was at the far end, a sturdy stone building with barred windows. As Case helped Emma down from the wagon, he scanned the street with watchful eyes. "Stay close," he murmured. "Word travels fast in small towns." Indeed, their arrival had already drawn notice. Several people on the boardwalk paused to watch their progress toward the jail, and Emma was certain she heard her name whispered as they passed. Sheriff Briggs, a burly man with a steel-gray mustache and equally steely eyes, greeted them gruffly. "Mrs. Pierce, Mr. Vaughn. Figured you'd be along once you got my note." "Where are they?" Case asked without preamble. "Locked up in back, sleeping off last night's whiskey," the sheriff replied. Meaner than snakes when they're sober, which they should be about now. I want to speak with them, Emma said firmly. Both men looked at her with surprise. That ain't necessary, madam, Sheriff Briggs said. Just need you to confirm you want charges pressed, and I'll handle the rest. I want to ask them why, Emma insisted. If someone put them up to this, as Mr. Vaughn suggests might be possible, I want to hear it directly from them. The sheriff exchanged a glance with Case, who gave a slight nod. Your call, Sheriff, but I'll be going in with her if you allow it. After a moment's consideration, Briggs nodded. All right, but I'm coming too. Those two are unpredictable at best. He led them through to the cell area, a small room with 3 barred cells, 2 of which were occupied by disheveled men who looked up with bloodshot eyes as they entered. One was perhaps 40, with a scraggly beard and a scar running along his jawline. The other was younger, no more than 25, with the same narrow features that marked them as brothers. Well, look who's here, the older one, presumably Silas, drawled. The schoolmarm herself, come to scold us proper. Mind your tongue, Harker, Sheriff Briggs warned. Mrs. Pierce wants to know why you destroyed her schoolhouse. Jeremiah, the younger brother, snickered. Wasn't much of a schoolhouse to begin with. Did the town a favor, showing how flimsy it was. Emma stepped forward, ignoring Case's subtle attempt to keep her behind him. Who paid you to do it? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples of surprise showing on both brothers' faces before they masked their reactions. Nobody paid us, Silas claimed, but his eyes shifted away too quickly. You're lying, Emma stated calmly. You had no personal grievance against me or the school. Someone wanted that building damaged enough to close it temporarily, and they used you to do their dirty work. Silas stood abruptly, moving to the bars with a threatening posture. You calling me a liar, lady? Case was instantly between them, his stance protective but controlled. Back away, Harker. The tension in the room escalated, but Sheriff Briggs diffused it with practiced efficiency. Enough. Sit down, Silas, or I'll have deputies come in here and make you sit. He turned to Emma. Mrs. Pierce, I appreciate your directness, but these two ain't likely to reveal who might have put them up to this, assuming someone did. Emma held Silas's gaze steadily. Very well. I'll press charges for the vandalism, regardless of who instigated it. She addressed the brothers directly. However, if you choose to reveal who paid you, I would advocate for leniency in your sentencing. Silas spat on the floor. We don't need your leniency, schoolmarm. But Jeremiah, the younger brother, looked uncertain. Silas, maybe we should shut your mouth, Silas snarled at him. We ain't saying nothing. Emma nodded, her suspicions confirmed by this exchange. As you wish. Sheriff Briggs, I'll provide whatever formal statement you need. They retreated to the sheriff's office, where Emma signed the necessary documents to press charges. Throughout the process, her mind worked rapidly, considering who in town might have motivation to disrupt the school's operations. As they left the jail, Case placed a protective hand at the small of her back. You handled that well, he said quietly. But I don't think we've heard the last of this. If someone orchestrated the vandalism, they won't be pleased that the Harkers have been caught. Then we need to discover who's behind it, Emma replied with determination. I won't have my students used as pawns in someone else's game. Their next stop was the mayor's office, where they found Jacob Holloway in conversation with several town council members. The discussion ceased abruptly when Emma and Case entered. Mrs. Pierce, Mayor Holloway exclaimed, coming forward to take her hand. We've been concerned about you. I trust Mr. Vaughn has been providing adequate accommodation. Mr. Vaughn and Mrs. Simmons have been exceptionally kind, Emma assured him. I understand from Sheriff Briggs that you've identified those responsible for vandalizing the school. Yes, Those Harker brothers troublemakers from the start, the mayor said, shaking his head. Rest assured, they'll face consequences for their actions. That's partially why we've come, Emma explained. I believe someone may have paid them to damage the school. This statement caused visible discomfort among the council members. One man, Harold Jenkins, owner of the town's largest dry goods store, spoke up indignantly. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Pierce. What evidence do you have? The brothers' reaction when questioned directly, Emma replied. And the simple fact that they had no personal motivation to target the school specifically. Criminals don't always need rational motivations, countered another councilman, a thin man Emma recognized as William Blackwood, who owned considerable property on the town's east side. Drunken vandalism rarely follows logical patterns. Case, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. With respect, gentlemen, the damage was too specific to be random. The stove was deliberately disabled, educational materials purposefully destroyed. That suggests intent beyond simple mischief. Mayor Holloway looked troubled. What are you implying, Vaughn? That someone in town orchestrated this? I'm suggesting it's a possibility worth investigating, Case replied evenly, particularly given the ongoing discussions about school expansion. This comment electrified the atmosphere in the room. Several councilmen began talking at once, their voices rising with indignation or defensive protest. Gentlemen, the mayor raised his hands for quiet. Let's not jump to conclusions. If there's evidence of broader involvement, Sheriff Briggs will uncover it. He turned to Emma. Mrs. Pierce, I assure you the council remains committed to education in our community. The new stove has been ordered and repairs are underway. Thank you, Mayor, Emma responded, studying the faces around her. Someone in this room could very well be responsible for the destruction of her classroom, but without proof, accusations would only create enemies. I appreciate the town's support. When do you anticipate the school might reopen? The stove should arrive within a week, Mayor Holloway replied. With installation and final repairs, perhaps 10 days total. In the meantime, we've arranged for notices to be posted informing families of the situation. After a few more minutes of conversation, during which Emma noted which council members seemed most uncomfortable with the topic, they took their leave. Outside, the afternoon had grown colder, with heavy clouds suggesting more snow to come. I need to visit the boarding house to collect more of my belongings, Emma said as they walked down the main street. If I'm to be your guest for another week, I'll need additional clothing. Case nodded. I'll accompany you, then we should start back. Those clouds don't look friendly. At the boarding house, Mrs. Langley greeted Emma with a mixture of concern and barely concealed curiosity. We've been wondering where you've been staying, Mrs. Pierce. Such a terrible thing about the school. Mr. Vaughn kindly offered accommodation at his ranch, Emma explained, keeping her tone neutral despite the older woman's transparent fishing for gossip. I've come to collect some additional belongings since the school repairs will take longer than initially expected. Mr. Vaughn's ranch, Mrs. Langley repeated, her eyes darting between them with undisguised interest. How providential that he found you during the storm. Case met the landlady's speculative gaze steadily. Mrs. Simmons has been an excellent chaperone, he stated, his tone making it clear the topic was closed for discussion. While Emma gathered her things, she could hear Mrs. Langley attempting to engage Case in conversation in the hallway, unsuccessfully fishing for details about their arrangement. His responses were polite but minimal, giving the curious woman nothing to elaborate upon in future gossip. That woman will have stories circulating about us by supper time, Emma remarked as they left the boarding house, a small valise of additional clothing in hand. "Small towns run on gossip," Case replied with a slight shrug. "Though I admit, I don't envy you returning to board with her after the school reopens." The observation made Emma pause. She hadn't considered what would happen after the schoolhouse repairs were completed. The thought of returning to her sparse room at Mrs. Langley's boarding house, with its drafty windows and the landlady's prying questions, suddenly seemed unbearably dreary compared to the warmth and companionship she'd found at Case's ranch. "Mrs. Pierce, Mr. Vaughn." A voice called from across the street, interrupting her thoughts. They turned to see Reverend Davis, the town's minister, hurrying toward them. "I've been hoping to see you," he said, slightly out of breath as he reached them. "We're organizing a gathering at the church hall tomorrow to discuss alternate arrangements for the children's education while the school is closed. Several parents have expressed concern about the extended interruption to learning." "That's very thoughtful, Reverend," Emma replied, genuinely touched by the community's concern. "What time will this meeting be held?" "1 o'clock after Sunday services," he answered. "We thought perhaps temporary classes might be arranged in the church hall itself, if you're amenable." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "That could work well. The space is certainly large enough." "Excellent. Then we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow." The minister glanced between them expectantly. "Of course," Emma assured him. "Though we'll need to return to Mr. Vaughn's ranch tonight before the weather turns." As if on cue, the first snowflakes began to drift down from the leaden sky. Reverend Davis looked up with concern. "Indeed, you shouldn't delay. Safe travels to you both and Godspeed." They took their leave quickly, Case helping Emma into the wagon before climbing up beside her. The snowfall intensified as they left town, large flakes swirling around them in increasing numbers. "Another storm," Case observed grimly, urging the horses to a faster pace. "This one's coming on quicker than I expected." By the time they'd traveled 2 miles, visibility had decreased dramatically. The wind picked up, driving the snow sideways in stinging sheets that made the horses toss their heads in protest. "I don't like this," Case said, his voice raised against the wind. "We're still a good hour from the ranch in good conditions, and these aren't good conditions." Emma clutched her cloak more tightly around her. "What do we do?" Case scanned the landscape, which was rapidly disappearing behind a veil of white. "There's a line shack about half a mile east of here, used it during roundups before I built the bunkhouse. Basic shelter, but it's solid and has a stove. Is it our best option?" Emma asked, trying to keep her teeth from chattering as the cold intensified. Case nodded grimly. "Unless this blows over in the next few minutes, which I doubt, it's our only safe option." He turned the team east, away from the main trail. Without the rutted path to follow, the going became more difficult, the wagon lurching over hidden obstacles beneath the rapidly accumulating snow. Emma clung to the seat, grateful for Case's steady hand guiding the horses. After what seemed an eternity, but was likely no more than 15 minutes, a dark shape materialized through the whiteout, a small cabin nestled against a stand of pine trees. "Thank heaven," Emma breathed as they drew closer. Case halted the wagon as near to the door as possible. "Wait here while I check inside," he instructed, jumping down. He returned moments later. "It's secure. Let me get the horses under shelter first, then I'll help you inside." Emma watched as he unhitched the team and led them to a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. By the time he returned for her, she was thoroughly chilled, her feet and hands numb despite her gloves and sturdy boots. "Come on," Case said, lifting her bodily from the wagon seat rather than waiting for her to climb down. "Let's get you inside." The cabin was basic, but sound a single room with a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot along one wall. It was cold but blessedly free of snow and wind. Case immediately set about building a fire in the stove, working with efficient movements. "There should be supplies in that cupboard," he said, nodding toward a small cabinet beside the cot. "Blankets, some basic provisions." Emma investigated while he tended the fire, finding 2 heavy wool blankets, some canned goods, coffee, and other staples. By the time she'd inventoried their resources, Case had the stove burning steadily, filling the small space with blessed warmth. "The storm's getting worse," he reported after checking outside. "We'll need to stay here until it passes. Could be overnight." The implications of this statement hung in the air between them. Propriety dictated that a man and woman not related by blood or marriage should never spend a night alone together, unchaperoned. Yet the alternative, attempting to reach the ranch in a worsening blizzard, was potentially fatal. "I understand," Emma said quietly. "The circumstances leave little choice." Case's expression showed both concern and a hint of something else, perhaps relief that she wasn't protesting their predicament. "We have shelter, heat, and provisions," he said practically. "We'll be comfortable enough until the storm passes." They settled into making the best of their situation. Case melted snow for water while Emma organized their meager provisions. A can of beans, some jerky, and coffee would make a simple but sufficient meal. As they worked around each other in the confined space, Emma became increasingly aware of Case's presence, the breadth of his shoulders as he bent to tend the fire, the careful precision of his movements, the occasional brush of his arm against hers as they passed in the small room. Outside, the storm howled, rattling the cabin's single window and driving snow against the walls with audible force. Inside, the stove gradually warmed the space, creating a cocoon of comfort against the elemental fury. "At least we have shelter," Emma remarked as they sat down to their simple meal. "I keep thinking of that first night you found me, what might have happened had you not come along when you did." Case's expression grew serious. "I wasn't planning to ride out that evening. Something just urged me to check the fence line near the school." He looked down at his coffee cup. "Providence, perhaps." "Whatever the reason, I'm grateful," Emma said softly. "Not just for the rescue, but for everything since. Your hospitality, your kindness. You've brought something to the ranch I didn't realize was missing," Case replied, his voice equally soft. "Laughter. Conversation. Mrs. Simmons is already dreading your departure." "Just Mrs. Simmons?" The question slipped out before Emma could consider its implications. Case met her gaze steadily. "No, not just Mrs. Simmons." The simple statement charged the atmosphere between them. Emma felt her heart accelerate, her breath catching slightly as she recognized the intent in his eyes. 2 years of widowhood had not erased her understanding of a man's interest, and Case Vaughn was making no attempt to disguise his. "Case," she began, uncertain what she intended to say. "You don't need to respond," he said quickly. "I shouldn't have spoken so directly. Your husband's loss is still fresh, and you've only known me a short time. That's not." Emma paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've found myself thinking of you in ways that have surprised me, ways that make me question whether I'm being disloyal to Thomas's memory." Case considered this. "Do you believe Thomas would want you to remain alone, to close yourself off from the possibility of happiness?" The question struck at the heart of her internal conflict. "No," she said after a moment. "Thomas loved life too much to want that for me, but it's been only 2 years. Sometimes I wonder if that's too soon." "There's no proper timetable for grief," Case said gently. "Some people mourn for decades. Others find their hearts opening again more quickly. Neither path dishonors the one who's gone." His understanding eased something tight within Emma's chest. "You speak from experience," Case nodded. It took me 5 years after losing Caroline and our child before I could even consider the possibility of caring for someone again, and even then I felt guilty for surviving when they hadn't. He met her eyes directly. But Emma, life continues. We honor those we've lost by living fully, not by halting our own hearts. The wind howled outside, emphasizing the intimacy of their shelter. Emma found herself studying Case's face, the strong lines of his jaw, the compassion in his eyes, the slight curve of his lips as he spoke. She had admired his physical presence from their first meeting, but it was his character that had gradually captivated her, his gentleness beneath the strength, his intelligence, his respect for her independence. "I think," she said carefully, "that my heart has already begun opening again, whether I planned it or not." The admission hung between them, weighted with significance. Case set aside his cup and reached across the small table to take her hand in his. "I won't rush you," he promised. "Whatever grows between us should develop naturally, in its own time." Emma turned her hand to twine her fingers with his, the simple contact sending warmth through her that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. "Thank you for understanding." They remained that way for several minutes, hands joined across the table while the storm raged outside, cocooned in a moment of connection that required no further words. Eventually, practical matters intruded. The cabin had grown comfortably warm, but the hour was advancing, and arrangements for sleep needed to be addressed. "You should take the cot," Case said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "I'll be comfortable enough on the floor near the stove." Emma glanced at the narrow cot, then at the hard plank floor. "That hardly seems fair. The cot is barely wide enough for one person." "I've slept in worse conditions," he assured her. "During the war, any dry spot of ground felt like luxury." Further discussion proved fruitless. Case was determined she should have the only proper sleeping space. Eventually, Emma conceded, though she insisted on sharing one of the blankets since they had only two between them. They prepared for sleep with careful courtesy, each respecting the other's privacy as much as possible in the confined space. Emma removed only her outer clothing, keeping her chemise and petticoat for modesty. Case similarly stripped to his undershirt and trousers, arranging his coat and spare blanket into a makeshift pallet on the floor. The stove required feeding every few hours to maintain heat through the night. Case promised to tend it, setting the remaining firewood within easy reach of his sleeping place. "Good night, Emma," he said as she settled onto the cot, wrapped in the heavier of the two blankets. "Good night, Case," she replied, watching as he stretched out on his pallet, his tall frame barely accommodated by the small cabin's floor space. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Emma lay listening to the storm's fury gradually diminishing outside, and to Case's steady breathing within. Twice she heard him rise quietly to add wood to the stove, his movements careful to avoid disturbing her presumed slumber. After his second trip to the stove, she spoke softly into the darkness. "You're not sleeping either." A pause, then. "No, too many thoughts. What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, shifting to see his silhouette in the dim light cast by the stove's vents. "Tomorrow," he answered. "The future. Possibilities." The simple words held complex meanings. Emma understood what remained unspoken. He was contemplating what might develop between them, just as she had been. "I've been thinking too," she admitted, "about choices and second chances." Case sat up, his back against the wall near the stove. In the faint orange glow, his expression was serious but gentle. "And what have you concluded?" Emma considered her answer carefully. "That life is too precious and too unpredictable to waste opportunities for happiness when they present themselves." The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire and the much diminished howl of the wind outside. Finally, Case spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, may I sit beside you, just to talk?" The request was simple but laden with significance. Emma shifted on the narrow cot, making space beside her. "Yes." He moved to join her, the cot creaking slightly beneath their combined weight. They sat side by side, not touching except where their shoulders met a tenuous but meaningful connection. "I need you to know something," Case said after a moment. "What I feel for you isn't impulsive or temporary. It's been growing since that first night I found you in the schoolhouse." Emma turned slightly to face him better in the dim light. "I believe you. I've felt it too, a connection that seemed to form almost immediately." "Is it too soon to speak of courtship?" he asked directly. "I understand if you need more time, but I'd like my intentions to be clear." The formal request, so in keeping with Case's straightforward nature, brought a smile to Emma's lips. "It's not too soon," she answered softly, "though I admit I'm surprised by how quickly my feelings have developed." "Sometimes the heart knows what it needs better than the mind," Case replied, reaching tentatively for her hand. "Mine recognized something in you from the beginning: strength, compassion, resilience, all the qualities I've come to admire most." Emma allowed her fingers to intertwine with his, appreciating the warmth of his palm against hers. "I saw similar qualities in you. Your gentleness, despite your strength. The way you've built something meaningful here. Your respect for me as a person, not just as a woman in need of rescue." The conversation flowed naturally from there, voices low in the firelit darkness as they shared more of themselves, hopes, dreams, fragments of their pasts that had shaped them. The hour grew late, but neither was inclined toward sleep, too captivated by this deepening connection between them. At some point, Case's arm slipped around her shoulders, and Emma found herself leaning into his side, her head coming to rest naturally against his shoulder. The position felt right, secure but not confining, intimate but still respectful. The storm's passing, Case observed as a lull in their conversation, coincided with the noticeable absence of wind against the walls. "We should be able to return to the ranch after dawn." "And then?" Emma asked, not moving from her comfortable position against him. "Then," he replied thoughtfully, "we continue as we've begun, getting to know each other properly, building something together if that's what you want." "I think it is," she said, surprised by her own certainty. "Though I expect Mrs. Langley will have quite a lot to say about our overnight absence." Case's chuckle rumbled beneath her ear. "No doubt, but we'll face that together, along with whatever else comes." Eventually, fatigue overcame them both. They remained side by side on the narrow cot, finding unexpected comfort in shared warmth and proximity. As Emma drifted toward sleep, Case's arm still around her shoulders, she realized she felt a peace that had eluded her since Thomas's death, not a forgetting of what had been, but an opening to what might be. Morning brought weak sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. They woke nearly simultaneously, momentarily disoriented before remembering where they were and why. Emma felt a brief flash of embarrassment at their sleeping arrangements, but Case's matter-of-fact attitude as he rekindled the fire and prepared coffee from their supplies helped dispel any awkwardness. "The storm's passed," he reported after stepping outside briefly. "Left nearly a foot of fresh snow, but the sky's clear. We should be able to reach the ranch by noon." They ate a simple breakfast of jerky and the last of the beans, then worked together to ready the cabin for departure. Emma couldn't help noticing how naturally they moved around each other now, anticipating needs and actions with an ease that suggested much longer acquaintance. Outside, the world had been transformed. Fresh snow blanketed everything, pristine and glittering in the morning sun. The trees near the cabin wore heavy white coats, their branches occasionally shedding small puffs of snow when stirred by the gentle breeze. Case hitched the team to the wagon while Emma watched, admiring the efficiency of his movements, and she admitted to herself, the strength evident in his shoulders and arms as he worked with the horses. Once they were underway, conversation flowed easily between them, ranging from practical matters regarding the school meeting the following day to more personal topics. There was a new openness between them, a freedom to express thoughts and feelings that had previously been constrained by uncertainty. "I've been thinking about the vandalism," Case said as they traveled, "specifically about who might have paid the Harkers to do it." Emma nodded, having considered the same question extensively. It would need to be someone opposed to the school expansion, with enough money to hire such work done. "And someone who stands to lose something if the expansion proceeds," Case added, "which narrows the field considerably." "The additional teacher's salary would increase the town's educational tax," Emma mused. "So anyone strongly opposed to higher taxes might be a candidate." "William Blackwood," Case said grimly. "He owns significant property in town and has opposed every tax increase proposed in the last 5 years. He was also unusually defensive yesterday when you mentioned the possibility of someone orchestrating the vandalism." The observation aligned with Emma's own impressions. "He's also been vocal about education being wasted on frontier children, who will mostly become farmers and ranchers anyway." "A short-sighted view," Case remarked. "My education has proven invaluable in developing this ranch. Modern agricultural techniques, business accounting, none of that would be possible without proper schooling." "Exactly," Emma agreed fervently. "But how would we prove Blackwood's involvement? The Harkers seem unlikely to implicate him, especially if he's paying for their defense." "We might not need to prove it directly," Case said thoughtfully. "Sometimes the best strategy is to force a mistake. If Blackwood believes his plan has been exposed, he might act in ways that reveal his guilt." They discussed potential approaches to this problem for much of the journey, eventually developing a strategy they would implement at the church meeting the following day. The ranch came into view shortly before noon, smoke rising reassuringly from the chimney. As they approached, Mrs. Simmons emerged onto the porch, her expression transitioning rapidly from worry to relief to keen observation as she noted their arrival together. "Thank the Lord," she exclaimed as they drew up to the house. "When that storm hit, I feared the worst. Are you both all right?" "We took shelter in the line shack," Case explained as he helped Emma down from the wagon. "Waited out the storm there." Mrs. Simmons's sharp eyes missed nothing, neither their ease with each other nor the subtle way Case's hand lingered at Emma's waist as she descended from the wagon. A knowing smile tugged at the housekeeper's lips. "Well, you're both safe, and that's what matters," she said diplomatically. "Come inside, I've got stew simmering and fresh bread just out of the oven." As they followed her into the house, Case's hand found the small of Emma's back in a gesture that was becoming familiar and cherished. The simple touch communicated volumes: protection, affection, and a promise of continued support. The afternoon passed pleasantly as they recovered from their unexpected adventure. Mrs. Simmons, though clearly bursting with curiosity about what had transpired between them, restrained herself to occasional knowing glances when she caught them exchanging smiles or sitting closer together than strictly necessary. By evening, they had settled into a comfortable routine around the fireplace, Mrs. Simmons with her knitting, Emma reviewing some teaching materials she'd brought from town, and Case reading correspondence that had arrived during their absence. The church meeting tomorrow could be contentious, Emma observed during a lull in their separate activities. If Blackwood is indeed behind the vandalism, he won't appreciate our suggestion of temporary classes in the church hall. Let him object, Case replied, setting aside a letter. The more defensive he becomes, the more suspicious he'll appear. I'll be attending as well, Mrs. Simmons announced, surprising them both. Been meaning to visit my sister in town anyway. Might as well combine the trips. Emma suspected the housekeeper's sudden interest in attending the meeting had more to do with witnessing their plan in action, and perhaps observing the public debut of whatever was developing between her employer and their guest than any pressing need to visit her sister. The evening concluded with a sense of anticipation for the meeting tomorrow, certainly, but also for the evolving relationship between Emma and Case. As they bid each other good night at Emma's bedroom door, Case took her hand, raising it briefly to his lips in a gesture both formal and intimate. "Sleep well, Emma," he said softly. "Tomorrow begins a new chapter, I think. For the school and perhaps for us as well," she agreed, warmth spreading through her at the tenderness in his eyes. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow sparkling in the brilliant sunshine. They departed for town immediately after an early breakfast, all three dressed in their Sunday best for church services before the community meeting. The small church was full when they arrived, the congregation's collective breath creating a cloud near the ceiling as they sang hymns in the modestly heated space. Emma was acutely aware of the glances directed their way as she sat beside Case, with Mrs. Simmons on her other side. News of her extended stay at the Vaughn Ranch had clearly circulated, generating predictable speculation. Reverend Davis delivered a sermon on community and mutual support that seemed particularly relevant to their current situation. As the service concluded, he reminded everyone of the meeting to follow, encouraging all parents and concerned citizens to remain. The church hall adjacent to the main building quickly filled. Emma noted with interest that William Blackwood was present, looking distinctly displeased about the large turnout. Mayor Holloway was there as well, along with several council members and most of the parents whose children attended school. "Quite a gathering," Case observed quietly as they found seats near the front. "Blackwood doesn't look happy about it." "Good," Emma replied, equally soft. "Let's see how he reacts to our proposal." Reverend Davis called the meeting to order with a brief prayer, then explained its purpose to discuss temporary educational arrangements while the schoolhouse underwent repairs. He then invited Emma to address the assembly. Standing before the gathered townspeople, Emma felt a momentary flutter of nervousness, quickly steadied by the sight of Case's encouraging nod from the front row. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you know, our schoolhouse was severely vandalized last week, requiring extensive repairs and a new stove. While I'm grateful that the town council is addressing these needs promptly, I share your concern about the disruption to the children's education." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Emma continued, her confidence growing. "Reverend Davis has generously offered the use of this hall for temporary classes until the schoolhouse is repaired. I propose we begin tomorrow morning at the usual time, maintaining our regular schedule as much as possible." More nods and approving comments followed this suggestion. Emma took a deep breath before continuing to the more controversial portion of her proposal. "Additionally, I believe this unfortunate event presents an opportunity to implement something many of you have expressed interest in: expanded educational offerings for older students. I propose that while using this larger space, we experiment with dividing the students into two groups by age with different instructional focuses." A buzz of discussion erupted. Mayor Holloway stood, raising his hand for quiet. "Mrs. Pierce, are you suggesting a trial run of the expanded curriculum we've been considering? Precisely, Emma confirmed. This temporary arrangement would allow us to demonstrate the benefits of age-appropriate instruction without additional expense to the town, since I would teach both groups myself during this period. And if this experiment proves successful, William Blackwood interrupted, his tone barely civil. I suppose you'll argue it justifies the expense of a second teacher permanently. If the educational benefits are clear, Emma replied evenly, then yes, I believe it would support that conclusion. However, that decision would ultimately rest with the town council and the community. Blackwood's face darkened. Convenient timing, isn't it? The schoolhouse gets vandalized just as the expansion debate heats up, and suddenly you have the perfect opportunity to push your agenda forward. The accusation hung in the air, its implications clear. Emma heard gasps and mutters from the assembled townspeople. Before she could respond, Kay stood. Are you suggesting Mrs. Pierce orchestrated the vandalism of her own workplace, Mr. Blackwood? He asked, his voice level but with steel beneath. That seems an extraordinary claim. Blackwood realized too late the trap he'd walked into. I'm suggesting nothing of the sort, he backpedaled, merely noting the coincidence. An interesting coincidence indeed, Case continued relentlessly. Almost as interesting as your apparent foreknowledge that the vandalism was specifically meant to disrupt the expansion debate, something neither Mrs. Pierce nor I had mentioned publicly until this moment. All eyes turned to Blackwood, whose face had gone from flushed to pale. I made no such claim, he sputtered. I merely observed. You observed something only the vandals or their employer would know, Case finished for him. That the timing was deliberately connected to the school expansion discussion. The hall erupted in shocked conversation. Mayor Holloway banged a wooden gavel for order. These are serious implications, Mr. Vaughn. Do you have evidence of Mr. Blackwood's involvement in the vandalism? Asked the Harker brothers, Case suggested. They might be more forthcoming now that their employer has effectively revealed himself. Blackwood stood abruptly. This is slander. I won't stand for these baseless accusations. He stormed toward the exit, only to find Sheriff Briggs blocking his path. I think we should continue this discussion at my office, Mr. Blackwood, the sheriff said quietly, along with the Harkers. As Blackwood was escorted from the hall, the meeting devolved into excited discussion. Mayor Holloway eventually restored order, returning the focus to Emma's proposal for temporary classes. Regardless of these troubling developments, he announced, the immediate question before us is Mrs. Pierce's suggestion for classes here in the church hall. All in favor. The vote was overwhelmingly positive. Parents were eager for their children's education to continue, and many expressed enthusiasm about the experimental curriculum division. Arrangements were quickly finalized. Classes would begin the following morning, with parents spreading word to all school families. As the meeting concluded, Emma found herself surrounded by well-wishers and parents expressing support. Throughout it all, she was aware of Case's steady presence nearby, occasionally catching his eye across the crowd and exchanging small, private smiles. When the last townsperson had departed, leaving only Emma, Case, Mrs. Simmons, and Reverend Davis in the hall, the minister approached with a thoughtful expression. That was quite a revelation about William Blackwood, he observed. Though I can't say I'm entirely surprised. He's always been more concerned with his pocketbook than the community's welfare. The sheriff will get to the bottom of it, Case replied. The important thing is that the children's education can continue. Reverend Davis nodded, then glanced between Case and Emma with shrewd eyes. Indeed, and perhaps more than education will flourish in our community. He smiled warmly. God works in mysterious ways, bringing people together through unexpected circumstances. Mrs. Simmons made no attempt to hide her approving smile at this observation. Mysterious indeed, she agreed, with a pointed look at her employer. Case cleared his throat, showing the first sign of embarrassment Emma had witnessed from him. "We should be getting back to the ranch," he said. "Mrs. Pierce will need to prepare for classes tomorrow." They bid farewell to the minister and left the church hall, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight. The town's main street was busy with Sunday visitors, many of whom nodded or called greetings as they passed. Emma noted with some amusement that the greetings were invariably directed to both her and Case together, as if they were already established as a pair in the community's mind. At the general store, Mrs. Simmons excused herself to visit her sister, promising to be ready for the return journey in an hour. This left Emma and Case to walk alone down the boardwalk, ostensibly to purchase supplies needed for the temporary classroom. "That went better than expected," Emma remarked as they strolled. Blackwood revealed himself with barely any prompting. "Pride often leads to carelessness," Case replied. He couldn't resist implying that the vandalism had achieved its purpose, even though doing so incriminated him. "You think he'll face consequences?" "If the Harkers confirm he paid them, certainly. Either way, his standing in the community is damaged. The council is unlikely to heed his opposition to school expansion now." They paused outside the Mercantile, temporarily alone on that section of boardwalk. Case turned to Emma, his expression serious. "There's another matter we should discuss," he said. "Your living arrangements once the schoolhouse reopens." Emma had been considering this issue herself. "I suppose I'll return to Mrs. Langley's boarding house," she said, though the prospect now seemed dreary indeed. "Or," Case suggested carefully, "you could consider another option." Emma's heart quickened. "What option might that be?" Case took a deep breath. "I realize this may seem precipitous given how recently our understanding has developed, but these past days have confirmed what I suspected from our first meeting, that you are a remarkable woman, Emma Pierce. One I would be honored to build a life with." He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. "I'm not proposing marriage this instant, though that is my eventual hope. Rather, I'm suggesting courtship with clear intent, and as a practical matter, I'm offering you the teacher's cottage on my property." "Teacher's cottage," Emma repeated, confused. "I wasn't aware you had such a building." "It's the old foreman's cabin," Case explained with a slight smile. "About a quarter-mile from the main house. It needs some renovation, but it could be made comfortable within a week or two. You would have your independence and propriety would be maintained, but you wouldn't need to return to Mrs. Langley's scrutiny. The offer was unexpected but immensely appealing. "And Mrs. Simmons," Emma asked, testing the practical aspects of this arrangement, "would be delighted to have you nearby," Case assured her. "She's grown quite attached to you, as have I." Emma considered the proposal, aware of its implications. Accepting would signal serious intent regarding their relationship, a step beyond casual courtship toward a future together. Yet the prospect filled her with warmth rather than trepidation. "I would need to ride to town daily for school," she observed, working through the logistics. "I'd accompany you initially," Case replied. "And once the trail is familiar, it's an easy ride on a gentle horse. Or," he added with a hint of humor, "we could consider establishing a school on the ranch itself eventually. There are enough children among the ranch hands' families and neighboring homesteads to justify it." The casual mention of "eventually," suggesting a shared future stretching years ahead, sent a thrill through Emma. 2 weeks ago, she had been a lonely widow, devoted to her students but isolated in her personal life. Now she stood hand in hand with a man who offered not just affection but partnership, respect, and a vision for their life together. "Yes," she said simply, "to the cottage and to your courtship with clear intent." Case's smile transformed his entire face, the joy in his eyes unmistakable. For a moment, Emma thought he might kiss her right there on the boardwalk. Instead, he raised her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. "You've made me very happy, Emma Pierce," he said softly. "As you have me," she replied, meaning it completely. They completed their errands in town with new lightness in their steps, exchanging glances filled with private meaning as they selected supplies for the temporary classroom. By the time they collected Mrs. Simmons from her sister's home, their plans were set. Emma would begin teaching at the church hall the next day, while Case would start renovations on the foreman's cabin. The ride back to the ranch was filled with conversation about these arrangements, with Mrs. Simmons offering enthusiastic suggestions about furnishings and curtains for the cottage. If she noticed the changed dynamic between Emma and Case, the way their hands occasionally brushed, the frequency with which they sought each other's eyes, she made no direct comment, though her satisfied expression spoke volumes. That evening, after dinner, Case suggested they walk out to view the cottage while there was still daylight. Bundled against the cold, they followed a narrow path through snow-laden fields, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "It's not much to look at currently," Case warned as they approached a small log structure nestled against a stand of pine trees. "Been used mostly for storage since my last foreman built himself a place closer to town." The cabin was indeed modest, a single room with a small attached lean-to that had served as a kitchen. But its bones were solid, the roof sound, and the location charming with its view of both the main ranch house and the distant mountains beyond. "It's perfect," Emma declared after they'd toured the space, "or it will be with some cleaning and a few repairs." Case looked pleased by her approval. "I'll have the men start work tomorrow. New window glass, proper stove, some furniture." He glanced at her questioningly. "What else would you need to be comfortable?" Emma moved to the center of the room, envisioning its potential. "Bookshelves, certainly. A desk for lesson planning. Perhaps a small settee by the window for reading." "All easily arranged," Case assured her, "and curtains according to Mrs. Simmons." She was most insistent about proper curtains. Emma laughed, the sound filling the dusty space with life. "Mrs. Simmons has definite opinions about homemaking." "She does indeed." Case moved to stand beside Emma, looking around the cabin with satisfaction. "But she's right more often than not." As they stood together in what would soon be her home, Emma felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the disparate pieces of her life were finally falling into alignment. The school, the community, and now this unexpected second chance at love, all forming a future far brighter than she had dared hope for after Thomas's death. "What are you thinking?" Case asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. "That life takes unexpected turns," she replied honestly. 2 weeks ago, I was kneeling in a vandalized schoolhouse, feeling utterly defeated. Now," she gestured at the cabin, then at him, "now everything has changed. For the better, I hope." There was a hint of vulnerability in his question that touched her deeply. Emma turned to face him fully, summoning her courage. "Very much for the better. So much so that I find myself wondering if propriety would be terribly offended if I asked you to kiss me." Case's eyes widened momentarily, then crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I believe," he said, stepping closer, "that propriety might look the other way just this once, considering we are technically standing in your future home." He cupped her face gently, his calloused palms warm against her cheeks as he bent toward her. The first touch of his lips to hers was tentative, questioning a request rather than a demand. Emma responded with a certainty that surprised even herself, her hands rising to rest against his chest as she returned the kiss with quiet fervor. The moment lengthened, sweetened. When they finally parted, Case rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cold air. "I've wanted to do that since I carried you through the snow," he confessed softly. "I'm glad you waited," Emma replied. "It means more now, knowing who you are beyond that first rescue." They walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, the setting sun painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and rose. The future stretched before them, not without challenges, certainly, but filled with promise and shared purpose. 3 months later, on a perfect May morning with wildflowers blooming across the Colorado plains, Emma Pierce became Emma Vaughn in a simple ceremony at the town church. The schoolhouse, fully repaired and expanded with a second classroom, was temporarily closed for the celebration, which nearly the entire community attended. William Blackwood was conspicuously absent, having sold his properties and departed Colorado City after paying substantial fines for his role in the vandalism. The Harker brothers had served brief jail sentences before being escorted to the territorial border with firm instructions never to return. The teacher's cottage had evolved into a charming home, though it would serve Emma only briefly as she moved into the main ranch house with her new husband immediately after their honeymoon journey to Denver. Plans were already underway to convert the cottage into a proper schoolroom for the growing number of children living on and near the Vaughn Ranch. As Case swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold of their home, the symbolism of their first meeting not lost on either of them. Emma reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the depths of grief and loneliness, through an unexpected rescue and burgeoning friendship, to a love that promised to sustain them through whatever life might bring. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," Case murmured against her hair as he set her gently on her feet in their shared bedroom. "I've been home since the moment you carried me through the snow," Emma replied, her arms twining around his neck. "I just didn't recognize it immediately." Their kiss sealed more than a marriage. It affirmed the healing power of love and the unexpected paths through which second chances arrive, often when least expected but most needed. Outside, spring sunlight bathed the Colorado landscape in golden warmth, a fitting backdrop to the new life beginning within the walls of the Vaughn Ranch, a life built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the enduring hope that can follow even the darkest winter storm.